Aloha, good evening, and welcome to Dr. Moore's collection of horror stories. Join Dr. Moore as he guides you through terrifying stories from listeners just like you. Now, from his studio high up in the central Oahu, Hawaii mountains, here is your host, Dr. Moore. Good evening. Happy Halloween. I'm Stephen B. Moore Sr. Tonight, we will explore tales of the supernatural, ghosts, evil spirits, and otherworldly occurrences. Please click the subscribe button so I can continue to bring you stories that frighten and shock you. These stories are based on first-hand accounts and are from people just like you who've experienced paranormal events. Let's get to our first story. This first story comes from Tanya from Hawaii, particularly the Everplains, Ever Beach. And Tanya talks about something that occurred to her and happened to her and her family at a wake.
This story takes place in Hawaii, where I was born and raised. When I was a young child, I would go with my mother to partake in what is called a novena. Being part Filipino, one of the traditions I learned about was being part of a novena or prayer. We would pray for eternal peace for the soul of a loved one who has passed away. Family and friends, we would gather together, usually at the family's home. The prayer would last the first 9 nights of a loved one's passing, followed by 1 year of prayer after the person's anniversary and a continuance of the prayer for that one night. My mother led the prayer or novena. Novena is the Latin word for novem. As she had with other novenas, it was led in the Ilocano dialect, as this was my parents' first language. And then at a certain point, after we finished eating, we would all gather in a specific area of the home where a small altar was in place. There were a few plates of food offered to our loved one as a symbol of sharing what we ate. There was a picture of my apo, a term of endearment, like you are saying grandfather, out of respect. A statue of Jesus and Mary and a rosary, as we were Catholics. So there we were, Mom leading us in the novena, as we all sat respectfully in the living room. This particular experience took place when I was in my early to mid 20s. And so that took place. We were sitting in the living room and I was sitting on one end of the hallway. I couldn't see the hallway, but I was there in front of the altar on the left. At the end of the prayer, everybody's talking, and one of my relatives said, "Did you see what I saw?" And she asked that question in Ilocano. Did you see what was in the hallway? Because the light was on, but the lights were dim. People could see the hallway leading to the other rooms of the house. So another family member asked, "What did you see?" I saw in the hallway, Apo. He was walking. He was going from room to room. And then he would come out, go to the next room until he was finished. But the thing about Apo was, I didn't see his head. It was missing. All I could see were his arms, his torso, his legs, his feet, walking from the neck down. I know that was Apo because he was wearing the clothes that we all knew him to wear all the time, usually when we would visit him. I said, nope, I didn't see it. So everybody got scared. I don't know how many other family members also saw it, but this one family member did. I remember this story from such a long time ago. So it is the belief that when spirits die, before they continue on their way, their journey to heaven, they come back to where they lived. They would come home to take their smells with them. He would go to room, or she would go to room to pick up the smells of himself or herself. So we believe that Apo came home to do just that, to pick up his smells. That's what the elders truly believed in, that it took place that evening in my Apo's family's home. One more thing that took place afterwards, because some of us were in the garage, some of us were still in the house. My mom, my auntie, myself, and maybe a family member were standing in the garage area leading to the sidewalk to the street, and we were just talking quietly amongst ourselves. And so all of a sudden, as we were talking, my mom just stopped in her tracks, and she said, just like her, it was just like her body froze all of a sudden. And I said, Mom, what's the matter? Are you okay? Because she really looked different. What's the matter? She said, something felt like it went right through me, and I felt really cold. Nobody else felt that? No, none of us did. My mom said, I think that might have been Apo leaving, coming through me, and he took his smells with him to leave. I didn't experience it. My auntie didn't. My other relative, none of us, just my mom. Could it be because she was the one leading the novena? I'm not sure. That question could never be answered until this day. And this was over 30, 40 years ago. One very important fact I want to make is that this whole experience that I went through, and my family and my mom went through, is that during the time of this novena, it was allowed back then, as I believe it still is allowed in the Philippines and practiced, that in the garage, because my auntie had a double garage, it was allowed back then. I remember there was a hearse in the garage. My Apo was in there in his coffin, and the coffin was open, and there he was resting in peace. And it was allowed in Hawaii, while everybody would be inside praying and just being around him. So I think Apo appreciated what took place for him to be remembered lovingly and dearly like that, so that it helped him go to his next place in his journey after life. And for me, I believe it was heaven. That's one experience I will never forget. And it's part of the culture I was raised in, being part Filipino. My mom had spoken the novena in her dialect, and the dialect was Ilocano, as that was my parents' first language. And that's the story I wanted to share with you, and I hope you enjoy it.
And that was Tanya from the Everplains, Ever Beach. And she talked about connecting with family spirits. Now, we understand a motivating factor when you talk about the paranormal, ghost spirits, things like that, is closure. Connecting family spirits with closure is a big thing, and maybe particularly in this case, there was a family member that was coming back to do closure. My interest in the supernatural is because of numerous family members that have departed, and we all have loved ones that have passed on, and we want to know, are they fine? Are they okay? Is there an afterlife? This is a common desire that we all as a people have had for years, is to find out, is there an afterlife? And we also want to make sure that our dearly departed are safe in heaven and in the hands of God. And we have strong connections to the departed. And one more thing we talk about is that, is death the end? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. That's for you to believe and decide. Now, this next story comes a little different. This next story is pretty terrifying because it talks about experiments that go wrong and can come back to haunt other people. And this story is from Robert. Robert is in Michigan, and he sent this in to me, and he said that this is about an escaped lunatic from a mental hospital in upstate Michigan. And this coincides with a story I wrote in my book, Dr. Moore's Collection of Horror Stories. And that book is available on Prime, Amazon, Prime bookstores. But this is something that coincides with what I was doing research on, and it's in my book. Now, check out my book, and you can see that story. It's about a guy named Thump Drag. But this story Robert tells us, it relates to that story, Thump Drag. So here is, without further ado, Robert's story. Hi, my name is Robert. I am a retired state trooper from Michigan. I was assigned to a station in Port Huron. One night I responded to a call that I had to go to the state hospital. When I got there, it looked like a scene out of hell. I saw the results of what looked like a slaughter on the 13th floor. Now, let me tell you, the 13th floor is where the hospital kept the criminally insane patients that were deemed by the state beyond help. You just had to hold them somewhere. But this particular night before, a patient had escaped. But before that patient escaped, it killed 3 night custodian interns. And they weren't just killed. They were ripped apart like a wild animal or a beast got in the hospital and tore them apart. Now, myself and some other state police, along with the hospital administrators, we looked at the videotapes and the cameras. And those video cameras are for security purposes. And they should have caught everything that happened on that floor and in that building and around the hospital, which they did. Now, there seemed to have been a power outage that night, but the cameras were always connected to a separate backup battery system called a UPS, or uninterrupted power source, uninterrupted power supply. And these cameras showed these 3 interns going to a particular room, number 13. One of the interns looked like a new guy because the admin folks said they seen the other 2 before. But anyway, the new guy went into that room, 13. Well, the power was out on the building, but for some reason the power cut back on. And it looked like the doors that were pushed open were locked shut. Now the camera shows something coming behind the guy that was in the room. And that guy was stuck in that room. Anyway, something got that guy. And then whatever was in that room forced the doors open and came out. And it proceeded to kill one of the other interns. And while it was doing that, the last intern tried to get into the elevator. He didn't see what the camera saw. And that was that weird-looking, deformed creature coming right up behind him, dragging his leg, reaching out for him. And the guy got in the elevator, turned around, and it went into the elevator with him. Now, I don't know if it was a man that got in the elevator with him, but only one of them came out on the first floor, and the cameras caught, outside of the hospital, the creature leaving. The doctors that worked, they said that this guy was a researcher and he was a doctor. that insane man was a doctor before in the past, but he was doing some unorthodox subjects, experiments, horrible experiments, unorthodox, unsanctioned experiments on living creatures. But on that day, some campers came by his cabin and shocked him, scared him, and he dropped acid on himself and fell off a ladder and broke his leg and hip. And the emergency medical people that came, based upon the campers telling the counselors what happened, they dropped this man again a couple times because he was struggling so hard, and it hurt his hip even more. Now he was very insane because he swore revenge on all of the kids, the campers. He said they did that to him. And he was on the loose now. The hospital staff reported that no one called him by his name in the hospital. They just called him by the sound he made. Thump, drag. Thump, drag. Thump, drag. With the sound of the chain that held him controlled to a wall because he tried to hurt other doctors in the past. But for some reason that chain probably was broken. They said this person had some supernatural strength. So anyway, all of us troopers that were working, we had to do the night shift. We were told to check campsites all around Port Huron. And I'll tell you what, there were some things that were going on mysteriously. Some campers began to disappear and mysteriously disappeared from the campsites. So we checked all over the grounds. And this one particular campsite we came had this deep ravine. We saw some clothes at the edge of the ravine. So myself and 5 other troopers, we came in guns ready. We called in the canine squad. We came into this one ravine and went down and followed it. And the ravine went to a overflow area that had a reservoir and a flowing river below it and a drop-off. And that's when we heard the screaming of a child. And we shined our flashlights and we saw this thing holding a child. It was a blood-curdling scene. The thing looked partially like a man and like a massive torn-up creature. And it was dragging the child deeper into the sewage area. So we told it to halt, and it turned and snarled at us. And we shined the lights on it, and we could see it. And it was the same creature that we saw on the videotape. This escaped mad doctor had all of these deformities on him. He had the child. So we sicked the canines on him, and he fought with the dogs. He threw the dogs left and right. But that enabled one of the cops, the state troopers, to grab the child and pull him away while this guy was throwing dogs. We started firing at him. He tried to come at us. And we shot him with everything. Pistols, rifles, shotguns, and the bullets started to hit him. It staggered back, and then it fell over the spillway screaming. Evil screams. Well, we went to the curb, to the cliffside, and we looked down and we saw him fall. Now that spillway cliff was 500 feet high. 500 feet above the reservoir. Nothing could have survived that drop after all the bullets we hit it with and fall. It was like a 500-foot drop rushing to rushing water. It ran into tunnels. A couple of the cops, the state troopers, they took the child, took him back up to the camp and called for backup and for medical assistance for both the child and the dogs. One was surviving, the other passed away. We made our report. The state came out earlier that day and dragged the water in the reservoir, but they didn't find anything. Not a single evidence showed that this creature died in that fall. So we made an effort to always keep checking no matter what. Day or night, we checked the campsites. And to this day, we never found anything. But there are stories being told by people that live up there that there's always something coming around. Man, that was chilling. That was crazy. Crazy to me. You know, Robert told that story. Robert worked with my brother, who was a state trooper at one time in the state of Michigan, and that's how he related this story to me. And, I used to go to a summer camp up in Port Huron. The Police Athletic League had a summer camp for inner city kids. I grew up in the projects of Detroit. And they take us out to the country. We learn to play sports and learn how to there's a greater thing in life. But we also learned some of the scariest tales, and that was one of them that we heard. And then this guy confirmed what he said. So if you read my book about thump drag, it relates to what Robert just told us about. And that's Hori. Here's another tale. Something terrible, something horrible. And this story is about a witch. And this story comes from Becky from the UK. I got an email from Becky. So I'm thinking, and all of the subscribers and listeners, all the people that subscribe and listen, I'm thinking this is another one that got a hold of my site and has told us a story about a woman who had to pay the price. Okay, go ahead.
I don't know the lady down the block. I don't know who she was. I don't know anything about her before I moved into my house. But when I met her, there was one strange person. You see, I bought a house, moved in, and then I met my new neighbors. But when I met Barb, she struck me as someone who's very different, very strange. The way she talked, how she stared at you, is really unnerving. But she always seemed to be cordial. I put her behavior out of my mind, even though the warning signs I was getting from my brain and my intuition said otherwise. Well, one night I was at home reading and drinking some tea, and it was getting rather late. I heard my doorbell ring and I heard knocks on my door. Frantic knocks. I answered the door. It was Barb. She barged in. She came in, went to my living room and sat down. I offered her some tea. She took a sip and said she was afraid. Something was chasing her because she feels now something was wrong. I asked her, "What did you do?" She just looked at me and then reached into her bag and pulled out a Warren book. Barb said that she was reciting a spell from the book. I stopped her right then and there, and I told her I did not want to know anything anymore. Barb ignored me and continued reading. She said the spell was intended to make me become her best friend. But she used the wrong words, and now we are in danger, both of us. I told her, I don't want to be part of you and your spells. I got up and told her to leave. We walked to the door. I grabbed the door handle. It would not open. The door would not open. Barb said we were stuck. Someone is coming. I would have to help her. I grabbed Barb and went back to the door to show her out the other way. The same thing happened. The door wouldn't open. I grabbed the knob. The door wouldn't open. And then the lights in my house all went out. Barbara grabbed my arm and pulled me into the kitchen. She lit a candle and opened the door, opened the book. Someone banged on my doors, the front door, the back doors, all the windows in the house. The windows rattled, and then strange silence. Then, mysteriously, the front door opened. Barb began to read really, really fast. I shouted at whoever came in, "Whoever entered my house, you are not welcome." Footsteps came down my hallway. Something was breathing really heavy. An awful smell came into my kitchen. I screamed at Barb to fix this now. The thing in the hallway slowly came into view and then into the kitchen. It stood in the doorway. It was a tall, ugly figure wearing a monk's robe and hood. The only thing I could see was the gnarled hands. Barb shuddered. She begged and screamed. The figure said in the low bass voice, "I came for Barb. I did not come for you. Not you." It said as it grabbed Barb and pulled her into her arms. The figure said, "Barb lied. She did not come here to help you. She came to trade your soul for hers." The thing laughed. And he looked at Barb, and Barb made a pact. Now Barb has to come with me. After all the things said in the monk's clothes robe, Barb wanted to be a witch. And not just any witch, but one who could do evil spells. And she got that power. She had to pay the price, though, for being in my coven. The thing said, "Give me the book." I looked at it. The evil monk said, "If you keep the book, you too will be visited by me later on, or I will give you everything you want. Everything you desire you will have. Money, wealth, fame. But you will pay the same price as Barb will." The thing the monk said, "If you keep the book, you too will be visited by me." I grabbed the book off my table and threw it at the monk and robe. It caught it and took Barb out my front door. I screamed and cried for help. They disappeared into the night like they stepped into an open portal. I never saw Barb again. Later on, Barb's house was sold and a new neighbor moved in. I met her. She said to all of us, our neighbors, one day while we were outside having a cookout, she said she found a book in the house. A weird, strange book.
Now that was a creepy story. Thank you, Tanya, for reading that. Mahalo, Tanya, for reading that story. Becky, the UK is filled with all kind of ghost stories and goblins and hobgoblins, and this is Halloween time, so all of this stuff is coming out more and more. And that is a terrifying, scary story. And I read the Bible, and I read about it. It says Leviticus chapter 19, Deuteronomy chapter 7. They both say, do not allow a sorceress to live. And Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 26, do not bring an abomination into your house, like that book. So these relate to some of these ghost stories, spirit stories that we're hearing about. And it's funny to me that when I get these stories, they relate to things that I read, in the Hebrew Bible, the Protestant Bible, the Catholic Bible, King James Bibles. These holy books have some roots to it, and people have stories that are rooted in some of these folk tales and Bible stories. Including the Bible that talks about Samuel, where the witch Endor called up Samuel, who had died, so that Saul could speak to him. And again, it didn't come out to be a good outcome for Saul. And you can read about that in the Bible, and you can also check out one of my episodes where I talked about that. And also, I'm going to talk about this next ghost story. I'm working on getting more research, but I have my notes from when I was stationed in Japan. I was in the Army for 21 years, 2 months, and 15 days, and part of my time in the Army was my service in Japan. And Japan has a lot of ghost stories involved. And this one I'm going to talk about, and I know if there's so many guys listening out, ladies listening out there, we talked about Camp Zama, Japan, Sagamihara, Japan, Sagamihara Housing, and Sagami Depot, Atsugi, Yokosuka, Yokota, Tokyo itself, and the outlying cities. But this particular story I'm talking about, this is a ghost story that when I was working in Sagami Depot, Japan. I used to be in a unit called Stick Fee, and we had to call the mainland at night to talk to some of the units in the mainland, USA. So calling from Japan meant we had to go to work at the office at midnight or 11 o'clock at that time. Now, let me tell you about Japan. Camp Zama, Sagamihara, those used to be Japanese military units there during World War II and before. The Japanese owned the land. Some of those places used to be morgues, and they also was where they held Allied prisoners of war into forced labor. Well, anyway, there was a lot of death in those areas, particularly Sagami Depot used to be a Allied prisoner of war camp. And the building I was working in used to be a morgue. And that place also was a morgue, not only after World War II, but also Korean War and Vietnam War. So there's a lot of dead bodies there. So anyway, to make a long story short, there was a lot of strange going on at night in these buildings, particularly the building I worked in. And like I said, we used to go to the building and make calls from Japan to the mainland, USA. But the problem was this building was haunted. Sagami Depot was haunted, Camp Zama was haunted, but this one, Depot, was truly haunted. The Japanese national workers did not want to stay there in that building anytime after 4:30, especially when it got dark. So, here's one story. I used to jump in the car and go over to Sagami Depot to make some calls at midnight. And it was just myself, so I went in the building and had to cut the light on. Had to unlock the door, cut the light on, go into looked like the heart of the building to where my desk was, and I made some calls. But while I was there, I heard people walking back and forth upstairs. Now this is at midnight. Nobody else is in the building, and the lights were off, so I had to cut them on and go in. And it was spooky, because I knew I was the only one in the building. But I could hear noises of people walking upstairs, You could hear sounds coming from other rooms. So I had to tolerate it to do my business because I had to get this work done. But it only took me about maybe 30 minutes, but it seemed like the 30 minutes lasted a long time because I could hear people walking up and down the stairs and up across the floor above me. But it would get to the point where I was like, I had to cut this meeting off short and I have to get out of here. And so I go to the front door and get ready to leave, and I felt someone just coming down the stairs in the dark, and I went out the door and shut it really quickly and locked it up. That was one of the first times. Now, the second time I went, I brought my dog. And usually dogs, they're happy to follow you wherever you go. They jumping around and all this, but This time the dog didn't want to go in the building. I had to drag him in with me and I had to pull him in. And the same thing happened. We heard the doors opening and closing in other parts of the room and, things like that happening. Made your flesh crawl, made your hair stand up, and doors were slammed. And so finally, I grabbed that dog and we ran out that building, locked the door, and we was gone. So I talked to an MP later on, another day. And he said, well, we always get calls to come to these buildings here. The lights will be on. There'll be sounds coming from them. When we go in and check the building, the doors will be locked. No one's in there. We still have to check the building and we still find things out of order. Have to come back again after we lock the building up and checked it, and lights are on again and noises are coming, sound like people crying in the building. These buildings were morgues. And I said, no, I didn't. But they said, yeah, they had dead bodies from the wars, in these buildings at Sagami Depot. So my building, Stick Fee, was one of them. And everybody that worked there, and you guys that worked there, you can call in and testify to the truth that there was always something going on. Disembodied voices, people walking, hallways, lights on, doors slamming. That's the story of Stick Fee. And I got more stories about that. So anyway, this is the end of my stories tonight. I appreciate it. I'm glad you listened. This next story comes from Brother R, who spent some time in Japan. And he has some information and insight on the supernatural and the Kanto plane. Brother R has experience in the paranormal and things that occur in Japan. So, let's listen to Brother R's insight, his story about haunted Japan.
All right, here we go. Prologue. It is widely accepted that a scientific and evidence-based approach offers the best method for understanding the complexities of an unexplainable event. But is this the only means to an end? Or are there other truths left unexplored? Picture yourself drinking a warm cup of tea in the late evening just before midnight. The cup is placed on the table and slowly rises into the air, dropping to the floor. While at the same time, a book tumbles down from a nearby bookcase, and an antique painting dislodges from the wall. Then at the exact stroke of midnight, the book opens to a specific chapter or page. This all occurs due to an unforeseen force. The story that is about to unfold is rooted in fact. It tells the tale of what possibly is and explores what could lie beyond the unexplained. Somewhere, yet nowhere, in the city of Zushi, Japan. Have you ever found yourself somewhere unexpected? Or perhaps there was a time when you followed a road that led to a completely unfamiliar destination than expected. It is said that Zushi, Japan, is a focal point for strange and unusual occurrences, particularly around the JR train station tunnel. One night, while driving home, an odd feeling came over me, as though time had shifted in a strange way. Suddenly, I found myself within a shroud of mist, surrounded by homes of an intricate architecture reminiscent of an era bygone. It was as if the fabric of time had interwoven with the very threads of the past. As I searched for my home in Ikego, I noticed someone or something dressed in the attire of that same era. And as I edged closer, the scene suddenly morphed into a more familiar setting, revealing that I was a mere 5 minutes from home. All seemed normal in that moment, but I could never render a logical explanation for what happened that night. Was it merely a misinterpretation of the five senses? Or was it an actual journey into the realm of the supernatural? One may never know for certain, but what is known is that the experience remains a mystery. There you go.
That was Brother R's insight into the paranormal, the supernatural in Japan. We appreciate everybody's stories, especially Brother R. And now we've come to the end of episode number 4. thank you very much. Happy Halloween to all. Hope you have a safe and enjoyable Halloween. We appreciate all listeners out there, and thank you to those who have subscribed. Please click on the subscribe button so we can continue to bring you these stories of the paranormal and the supernatural. Please feel free to contact me at my website if you want to share your stories. Send your ghost stories to docmorecollectionhorror@hotmail.com. That's docmorecollectionhorror@hotmail.com. Click on the website, subscribe please, so I can keep bringing you stories of the supernatural and macabre. Until next time, that noise in the dark, that bump in the night, is it real? You be the judge. You've been listening to Doc Moore's collection of horror stories with your host, Stephen B. Doc Moore Sr. Join us next time as Doc Moore brings more stories from interviews about supernatural ghosts, evil spirits, seances, and otherworldly occurrences. Please click the subscribe button so we can continue to bring you stories that frighten and shock you. Until next time, beware and happy Halloween. This show is produced in Central Oahu, Hawaii. Music created by Tanya L. and Stephen B. Moore Sr. and the Doc Moore and Moana Band. Stephen B. Moore Sr., Ph.D., Media Productions, LLC.